Who are you?
I am a joyful man. One of the big abdications of power and leadership I see is people refusing to acknowledge that they are gatekeepers. During COVID, I started a virtual sex organization. What was it called? Virtual Erotic Adventures. So like everybody on their computer on Zoom doing sexy things, and it was beautiful.
What is attunement as far as you're defining it?
Have you ever had a moment where you're cuddling with someone or you're holding someone and they start to run sexual energy and it's not what you want? That's the opposite of attunement. I don't say, what is my integrity? I say, what does it look like for me to be in integrity? And what that means is for my actions to match my words. When I was 25, I was in a relationship with a much older woman and it ended really badly. And there was violence in the breakup between both of us, but I was violent. And that was really, really informative. So I went on a self-improvement journey, finally took the time. Men's groups can really be a platform to propel yourself and propel each other to your higher selves. You have to choose to use them that way. Otherwise, even worse, they can be a place of reinforcing your toxicity. I stand alongside my clients as they stand in the fire of their own actions. My focus is on this intersection of power and harm because it's such a third rail in our society, because we still don't have good or nuanced ways to talk about it.
When somebody does cause harm, then what do I do? How do I do that? How do you walk somebody through those steps?
The best thing that anybody who's listening about what to do when you cause harm is.
Welcome to today's episode of Getting to Know You. I'm your host, Cameron Edward Benton, and on today's episode, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Mischa Byruck. Mischa is a men's coach and the founder of Evolve.men, where he primarily coaches men in positions of power, such as celebrities and CEOs, who have caused harm, and using that harm as an opportunity for deep transformation. Mischa is a powerful human being, and one of the first topics we talk about is power. What does it mean to wield power? How do you have power without being corrupted by it? We talk about what does it mean to be a man and the importance of men's work, men's groups, and finding our integrity as a man or as any person, and tuning into what our values are and using that to guide us through our lives. Mischa has been through so much in his life, starting different businesses, whether it's a online erotic sex party group during COVID, or whether it's various nonprofits, and now in coaching, where he's been coaching for men for over a decade. He is connected with several different men's groups, whether it's Mankind Project or Sacred Sons. And he's somebody who I was fascinated by because I heard him on a podcast with my previous guest, Mia Schachter, where they were talking about these topics and talking about how men who have caused harm can be redeemed. And I think this is a really important topic because there is so much in the air over the last 5, 6 years, decade, since the Me Too movement in particular, where these topics around consent and power and harm have really come to the surface. I think Mischa is a really, really powerful and profound voice helping men heal and be better men. So if you're a man, or if you know a man, or if you love men or like men, this is a great episode for you, and I highly recommend tuning in. We have a beautiful conversation, and there's a lot to be gained in just diving into this, and I hope whoever you are, wherever you are, that you are tuning in and asking these questions for yourselves, tuning into the groups around you and asking your friends and having deeper conversations like this. So without further ado, here's getting to know Mischa Byruck. Who are you?
I am a joyful man.
Beautiful. Why are you a joyful man?
Because I love being in my body, and I love being a man in society. And yeah, there's such opportunity so much opportunity to be just a little bit different from what society expects, and have that be a gift to the people around me. I love trucks and sports and intense movies and all this stuff associated with American masculinity. I also love to dance and navigate power and dominance, and be with my own capacity for leadership and yeah, I'm just happy to be in this body.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I guess what comes up for me first is just like, what does it mean to you to be a man? I think in our current culture, we have so many questions about, gender or sexuality or all these different things, or whether it's an archetype that we're living up to, or whether it's like societal norms that are pushed down on us, or whether it's, our bodies, and that is all that is our gender or is not, and that everything else is just kind of extrapolated on top of it. So like, what does that mean to you to actually be a man?
Well, I mean, I'll just caveat by saying that I think for what it means to me to be a man is different from others. And I'm a professional men's sexual integrity coach. And of course, I get asked questions about sex and gender all the time. And I try not to make my answers about myself normatives for others. And I like my manhood is I experience as a combination of yes biology, but also and societally assigned roles. But there's something deeper. I think a lot of what I find to be joyful about manhood is the combination of power and responsibility. I have an incredible privilege when I walk through the streets, when I walk through the world, especially as a cis hetero able-bodied white man. Like so I've got huge amounts of power, and that's an incredible thing to walk through the world with power. And I think a lot of how I conceive of manhood specifically and how I relate to my own manhood is, what is my relationship with that power? Am I in right relationship with that power? Am I conscious of my responsibilities with that power, both literally in my physical interactions with other people as well as broadly in the world? I think a lot of my understanding of my manhood, I'm not really going to make this for other people, but my manhood has to do with responsibility.
Yeah, I love what you said there with being aware of your own power and seeing that as a gift. I know that for myself, and I think many others that I've talked to, that power can hold a lot of guilt with it or shame, where it's like I've definitely, at least for my own life, I have felt very much like, oh, there's like all this privilege that I have, and therefore that is bad, right? Like I am bad for having privilege, or I'm bad for having the things that I was just born with that I didn't choose, versus looking at it from a place of like, how do I look at this from a place of power, but also not looking at it from a place of ignorance with that power as well? Because I think that there's also this like dance or interconnected piece where it's like a lot of people are like, well, this is like how I am, and like however that's happening over there doesn't matter in my life because it doesn't affect me. So as long as I'm happy, then we're all good. And so what I'm hearing in the way that you even described it is like you have this very attuned, in a sense, like relationship to that power, where you see it as a gift and a blessing and a responsibility, and something to embrace fully and celebrate at the same time, and understand that people will perceive you in particular ways that you can't necessarily control, and you can do a lot with that power and that gift to make a positive impact in the world.
Yep. There's so many ways to abdicate our responsibilities. There's so many easy paths. We can adopt a political philosophy that's really suspicious and skeptical of power and all of its manifestations, and that tends to lead to a refusal to acknowledge the power that you have. I think your last guest, Mia Schachter, has this incredible quote of, "You will always abuse the power you refuse to acknowledge that you have." And I think that's true across every possible type of power. And and so yes, I again and again I encounter in others, in clients and in communities and students, and peers, a hesitancy around power. Right? Ooh, power is bad. Like power means like all those bad people with.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, power is everywhere, and all of us have power. You can't, like, if you're listening to this and think that you don't have power, just think of all the people that you're in deep relationship with, and the power that you have if you chose to dramatically hurt them, if you chose to, just with your words, to dramatically cause harm and hurt and disruption in the people whose lives you're closest to. Like, we don't need to be CEOs or presidents to have power. We simply need to be able to affect the lives of others, and most of us can do that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm fascinated with that idea of power, and the thing that came up to my mind as you were talking about how we can be afraid of power is, one of the colloquialisms or saying, right, is like absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And so there's this idea that,
Sure.
and it's an idea, right? But like there's this idea that this, when you have more and more power, you become corrupted, you can become this evil thing. And so I think there can be a fear where it's like, oh, if I become powerful, then I'm going to cause significant amounts of harm to other people. And so I don't want to embrace that power. I don't want to move towards that.
Yeah.
Is that something you see with people? Like, how do you kind of
There's a power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, unless you're conscious of it, unless you are willing and able to consistently prioritize your values, unless you're willing to abdicate power, or not abdicate, but to share power when it's appropriate, to withhold from doing self-interested things when your power facilitates it. I mean, it's a dance, but that, Julie Diamond, who's an academic, and Dr. Keltner, who's also an academic at Berkeley, are both written extensively about power, and they've pointed out the ways that, like, to support your point, this wonderful idiom of power corrupting. Power actually, the more power we have, the more our brains change. There's a beautiful neuroscience to power. If you're used to being in a down power position, you're usually in fight or flight. If you're used to being in an up power position, and the more up power positions you gain, or you actually diminish in empathy, increase in confidence, you'll notice that you're far more secure. That's why you see people who are more used to being in power are more able to dominate conversations, are more able to walk into rooms confident and assume that they're welcome. And power, it actually does literally change our brain, and we can also dance with that and navigate it, just like we can navigate all kinds of adverse or challenging contexts. These kinds of social dynamics are not immutable, and they are not destiny. And honestly, it is I think a conceit, and frankly a dangerous one, to be so blanket suspicious of power, because most of the people who I hear talking about that tend to ignore or minimize the power that they possess, and that tends to lead to harm.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that
not to make that about you, but like,
no,
really, like, I do challenge this, that idea that it's even that it's even possible to stay away from power. I'm very skeptical of, like, super flat hierarchical organizational models and community-based models. Like, I'm skeptical of any model that implies that we can erase power. Right? We don't have hierarchy here. There's always hierarchy. The question is, are you aware of it? Are you conscious of it? Is it able to be named? Every single flat hierarchical structure I've seen refuses to acknowledge the hierarchies that do exist, by seniority, by confidence, by race, by age, by gender, by wealth coming into the organization. And like, they can't talk about that because we're flat. And that actually leads to huge amounts of abuse and, like, a weird gaslighting of ourselves, where we pretend that there is no power, when of course there is.
Yeah, you end up putting it into the shadow and letting that simmer underneath the rug while it's building and building.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And it doesn't mean that, like, we don't have to swing to the other side either, and dominate everybody. It's just,
Yeah.
the hierarchy is the only way. Like there's hierarchy can be beautiful because it can be clear. And it's not always, there's also a beauty in consensus and a beauty in attunement. And I think that the impetus is to recognize where do I have power and influence in this moment? And am I using it in a way that aligns with my values? I think for a lot of us, our values are not just to win and destroy everybody. A lot of us want to be a contribution in the world.
Yeah. No,
I love that we started talking about power. I love power. I love talking about power, and I love power. Hey, not afraid to admit it.
good. Yeah. Well, that kind of like brought up another question as you're talking about it, where you're talking about how as you have more power, you gain in confidence, you decrease in empathy, you have basically a greater feeling of security, believing that you're going to be welcomed into spaces, etc. Correct? And then I guess my question in that then that is curious to me is like, is it possible to grow in power while growing other people's power as well? Or is it this kind of like binary thing where we end up like, well, if I'm getting powerful, somebody's getting less powerful, and therefore I'm making somebody less secure while I become more secure? Or is there a way to elevate everybody together?
Of course, so many ways. So many ways. There's so many. I mean, just think of the leaders that you most admire and the ways that they leveraged their leadership to be empowering. From making a lot of money, and instead of just like giving away, to charity, like actually investing in people around you, in their careers, in their life dreams, really like taking financial wealth and spreading it in a way that's like actively empowering and not just reinforcing of the existing systems, right? So the difference between targeted anonymous gifting and naming a wing of some atria or whatever, some opera after yourself, or like using charity to self-aggrandize and not actually challenging systems. In community, community leaders can be, right? You can be the one who dominates the conversation and makes all the decisions unilaterally, or you can use the fact of your leadership to proactively say, hey, person who never talks, what is your thought? Or hey, like, what would it look like to empower you? I really tend to gravitate towards leaders who I can see are using the opportunity of their leadership to practice and hone and get better at all the skills that power tends to diminish, like attunement, like listening, like platforming others, especially people with maybe more marginalized, or people like, and being smart about it too. One of the big abdications of power and leadership I see is people refusing to acknowledge that they are gatekeepers, that part of their job is to maintain safety for the people that they're responsible for. A great example, I used to run during COVID, I started a virtual sex organization. It was what was it called? Virtual erotic adventures, right? So like everybody on their computer on Zoom doing like sexy things, and it was beautiful. And beginning it, I started with this philosophy that I'd kind of really inherited, which is one of inclusivity, right? Which is inclusivity.
Sure.
Everybody's welcome is what I thought inclusivity meant. And then, of course, it was pointed out to me by people who loved me and who came from much more marginalized identities and backgrounds than I did, that when you a black woman who didn't grow up with money was a dear friend, really my best friend, and she was like, okay, like, Mischa, when you hear inclusivity, you hear something beautiful. When I hear inclusivity, I hear that you, as a white man, are going to let in all the other white people who are going to hurt me. Like, you're going to let in racists. You're going to let in sexists. You're going to let in people who are going to body shame me. Right? When you say inclusivity, I hear not safe for me. Right? Everybody's welcome. Oh, I guess that means that like the people who are going to like make my life harder are welcome. I don't hear that you're protecting me.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm hesitant to join your organization because right, like you're like a big open tent, everybody's welcome. That's not
Right.
actually say, right? Woof! Right? What a beautiful awakening that she offered in that moment to like my responsibilities. What I thought that I was doing with power was being magnanimous and generous and saying open to all. And really what she was calling me into was like, no, you actually have to make hard decisions.
Yeah.
Part of wielding power well is to really actually put a stake in the ground for, are you going to be exclusive based on looks and wealth? Or are you going to be, and thinness? Or are you going to be exclusive based on values? Are you going to be exclusive based on vibe? Are you going to be exclusive based on, people aligning with political positions? And to what degree? Like, oh, what an awakening to the responsibilities that I held in that moment.
How did you navigate that? Because I think you mentioned this regarding, like, I can't remember what the group was, but it had something to do with like the Folsom Fair and like Nazis, and there was like this like Nazi pig thing that you were talking about in another podcast. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
So, yeah, I love this example. My supervisor and mentor is the executive director of the Folsom Street Fair, which is the largest leather and kink event in the world. And they told me a story that I now repeat, which is at some point this group called, I can't remember, something like Nazi Death Pigs, which were a group of people who really enjoyed this kind of particular like Nazi kink. This was their kind of kink that they wanted to play, and they wanted to have a booth and an exhibit and demonstrations at Folsom Street Fair, and they applied for a place. So this was not a terrorist organization. This is just people with a very, very, very specific kink.
Yeah.
And there were protests on about their application from various other community members, and I might not be telling the story right because this is not my story, but the upshot is that there was pressure, like, of course we shouldn't allow these people. And then there was a lot of people who were like, of course you should. Like, this is one of the only places in the world where these, right? Like, we don't want to start censoring. We don't want to start, like, limiting. And the conclusion that they came to, and I don't think this is like a blanket best practice around inclusivity practices, but the philosophy behind it is, which is the conclusion that they came to was to not allow this group to be there, but not because they were judging their kink, but because of their own capacity as an organization. And I do advise this to other organizational leads, or gatekeepers, right? The question is not, do you believe that who this challenging person is okay? The question is not about judging them. The question is, do you have the skills to stay in your integrity as a space holder and hold them well? Keep them safe, keep other people safe. Is their presence going to compromise your commitment to safety for the rest of the group, etc.? And what they realized was they're like, you know what? We are the best in the world at what we do, but even we don't actually have the skills to commit to being able to hold safe space according to our standards with this group in our space.
Right. And so what I hear in that, right, is it goes from being about the other or the person or the judgment of other people and who they are, but really looking back at like more my capacity and like what do I actually have the capacity for in a particular situation, whether I'm holding a play party space or I'm holding a conversation between friends or whether I'm whatever it is that I'm doing. It's like, do I have the capacity? I'm looking more internally and tuning into that more rather than looking externally about whether this is good or bad or not.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's such an elegant reminder of a practice that all of us can adopt, even in our interpersonal conversations, of tuning to our own capacity. Like, am I able to be as present as it's important to me to be? Right, and this is an important distinction. It's not right. Like if someone's having a conversation and it's draining to me, right? Of course, my instinct is to be like, oh, this person is such a drain. God, what a drain. Like, oh, just get away. God, like what a burden they are on me. Right? And the reframe is, I'm not able to be present in this conversation in the way that it's important to me to be present. Like it's important to, like, right? So I'm returning the focus of the challenge to my capacity and also to my values. Right? It's important to me to be present. It's important to me not to be in situations where I find myself cultivating resentment. Right? A good example, my dad's got dementia and my mom wants me around all the time. right?
Yeah.
They live relatively close to me, and I've increased the frequency of my visits to roughly once a week at this point. But like, I am really tuning in to my capacity, and like to where I'm cultivating resentment, to where I'm cultivating frustration, to where I'm where like those dynamics are existing in me. And I'm not saying that like the second there's any discomfort, I have a right to like not help my
Right,
mom
right,
take care of my dad. Of course not. But I'm paying attention to my capacity and to how it's affecting me.
right.
And I might at some point like draw some limits or boundaries or manage my time in such a way that I can stay a joyful man, that I can stay a joyful person,
Mm-hmm.
that I can fill my own cup and be resourced. It's so tempting to just give and give of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
or to just put up any boundaries when we experience discomfort. And instead, I try to do my best to attune to my capacity. And ooh, wow, like it's really important to me to show up well, and I just know I'm going to show up badly right now.
Yeah. How do you develop that capacity for attunement? And maybe even circling back to an initial question is like, what is attunement as far as you're defining it?
Well, attunement is such a beautiful word. Um, have you ever had a moment where you're cuddling with someone or you're holding someone and they start to run sexual energy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not what you want?
Mm-hmm.
That's the opposite of attunement.
Okay.
Um, I use that example because attunement is fundamentally about matching our energy with the people that we're with.
Hmm.
If you're getting sad, then I might attune to you. It doesn't mean that I'm going to get sad, but I might slow down my conversation. I might slow down the pace of my words. I might pause. I might maybe check in. I might just notice. Maybe consider adjusting topic. If you're getting excited, I might find myself revving up and like matching your vibe.
Mm-hmm.
I might find myself getting excited, but then if I see that you're not being able to match me, I might slow down a little bit to make sure that you're with me. Yeah?
Yeah.
There's attunement in conversation, in business dynamics, certainly in sex and romance. When we're like you could imagine musicians jamming with each other really beautifully, and like, ooh, yeah, they're vibing. They're all kind of like flowing with each other. That's a beautiful example of attunement.
Mm-hmm.
Traffic, where all the cars are like being really respectful and moving in unison, versus one car that's like, like
Yeah.
riding everybody and then like moving around them and like right. A lot of the harm that my clients have done in the world, because I work with clients who have done harm and I help them use that as an opportunity for transformation, has to do with a failure in key moments to attune, to notice, ooh, this person's going into a trauma response that I'm in bed with, or to notice, I've been dominating the conversation in this business meeting. I always do. Everybody around me is annoyed. Or I just said something that was really hurtful and the person didn't tell me, so I don't know, right? But because I'm not attuning, I'm not noticing, I'm not observing the people around me. I'm not observing their body language, the pace of their voice. Yeah. Attunement is also attunement to self, right? You can definitely be attuned to yourself or not. You could be, ooh, am I someone who notices when my heart increases? Am I someone who notices, like, can I cultivate the ability to notice when, ooh, I'm uncomfortable right now, I'm scared. Can I name that to myself, at least? It's really a skill that we're not often taught, to notice and name our internal sensations, and how those correspond to external dynamics. Yeah, you asked how I learned it. There was no school. I wish there was an attunement school. I wish it was taught in school. You know, I I'm a little on the spectrum,
Hmm.
and most of my clients are too. It's pretty normal at this point to be abnormal. But yeah, attunement has always been really hard for me. So I learned it really consciously, and I'm still learning it. I'm still not perfectly attuned. I know some people who I feel like my story about them is like this person is just like naturally like one of the most attuned people, and who like right, and you know like
Mm.
everybody likes this person, and
Yeah.
not just because they're like out and gregarious, but because they can match vibes. They can be slow, they can be fast, they can be intense, they can be vulnerable. Like people really feel comfortable around them
Hmm.
because they're really naturally good at being with. So that's the real answer. I'm going to stop talking in a sec.
No,
The attunement is the art of truly being with another in presence, communication. The quality of your presence is attunement.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because that word has been coming up in my consciousness and my field, my people. All of that word has come up a lot for me more recently. Is feeling very accurate of what you just described. Of that presence with somebody, but it is more than being even present with them. It's this for me. It's almost a sense of being tapped into them, but allowing them to tap into me at the same time.
Mm,
I
that's
think
lovely. That's a lovely way of saying it.
thank you. Um, and it makes me think as you were talking to, I think the word empath gets thrown around a lot, but for people who are, I would say, outward focused sometimes, right? There can be almost like a lostness of self in that, right? Where there's almost an attune or a disattunement from oneself, right? Where it's like we are so in other people's feelings and emotions and ups and downs that like we kind of lose a sense of our own self and we kind of just feel discombobulated or disconnected.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's that honestly the other extreme where it's like we're fully in ourselves, we aren't connected to anybody else. And you mentioned like the car going out, and I think a lot about the festival scene and raves, and like it's really interesting because you can tell often when it's somebody's first time at a rave, particularly if they've had a lot of alcohol, because they are not attuned with the rest of the group. They are trying to mosh when everybody's trying to vibe, right? Or they're trying to be very proactive in some way where everybody else is like, well, we're in this mode right now, but you're in that mode right now, and we're not in the same wavelength, which is really interesting to me because I know one of the things that happens with music is that, like, at least at a concert, like everybody's brainwaves sync up, for example. So it pulls us into the sense of attunement and oneness and interconnectedness, right?
Mm,
So yet we can still be kind of disconnected from that in one way, shape, or form, which I think is fascinating.
totally. And I mean, I've noticed that like one of the ways that like I manage, especially in like broad social situations, is I'm conscious of a meta level. Like, am I vibing with the people around me, or it's like, oh, maybe right now this isn't actually the vibe. This isn't right for me. And like sometimes, I think like like experienced partiers, especially like, and I don't party very much anymore, but like experienced partiers, I found I've always found it reassuring when when I'm with someone who's like, you know what, I'm gonna go off and do my own thing for a little while. Like I'm right. Like
Hmm.
a kind of uncharitable way of saying that is like I'm not willing to attune to you all.
Yeah.
But a different way of saying that is saying like I'm actually finding that my vibe is taking me over here, and like
Hmm.
it's not actually aligned for me to work to attune to your energy. Like I'm actually like this isn't
Yeah.
right. I've seen this done very responsibly and beautifully in sexual scenarios as well,
Mm.
where like, and such a reassuring evidence of someone with a healthy sense of their own sexual abundance and their own boundaries, and they're and, like attuned to self.
Hmm.
You know, if um, if say I'm sharing sexual energy with someone and I'm like, you know what, this isn't feeling right. I'd like to pause or slow down or talk about it. Like I don't feel right in my body. There's something about the way that you're in your body that doesn't feeling right. Like our energies aren't really synced in the right way or in a way that feels good. Like, I can't read you right now. Like, oh, so healthy to just kind of like de-escalate or take the interaction into whatever way it needs to go,
Yeah.
rather than going into the automated motions of, yeah, you know. So
Yeah.
this applies to across genders. This is something that I think is such an important skill.
Yeah. Is there a way to develop that skill? Do you use any particular practices, or do you got anything like with your clients through that exactly?
So many. There. Here's a couple off the top, and I'm gonna orient like one for men like me who dominate conversations. The practice is to, especially with women or people of different genders, um, the practice is to leave 3 to 5 times longer pauses. It's fascinating to see how many people who are used to dominating conversations feel like it will instinctually fill the gaps of conversation, where people who are maybe communicate in different ways and different cadences or feel less confident just occupying space and maybe want to see if the person they're with really wants to hear from them will wait for a little bit more space to then fill it. So like longer pauses. Pauses are also great because it gives you an opportunity, if you're used to talking and filling in those pauses with words, to observe my body, your body. What are you doing with your arms? Are they crossed like this? Is this person's energy shrunk up? Are they leaning forward? Are they looking around? Am I noticing that I'm looking around? You know, am I rushing in my cadence? Am I fidgeting? Right? Um, is there something that I might ask this person that I haven't? Am I filling too much of the space just with my own thoughts?
Yeah.
That's just one example. Yeah, how did that land?
Yeah, I thought it was beautiful. I mean, it really reminded me of one of the best lessons I learned in sales was to pause after you're done talking. A lot of salespeople, when you sell, it's you, especially when you're early on, you feel this nervous energy about, are they going to buy this thing from me or whatever it is. And you can take that silence or that pause where they're literally just thinking and processing, or maybe giving you the opportunity to, fumble over yourself as well. But giving that pause and letting that awkward pause, I find, go, often reveals like the real thing that is the objection, if you will, right? That thing that they're actually concerned about, or literally they just talked themselves into the sale because they just needed to verbally process it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't, create that space for them, you'll never get there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even something that I've learned from conversation. I'm thinking about my friend Ben when I was in a leadership program with him, and that was something that he, I think, taught me and taught all of us really well, was like, let the awkward pause be there, because that's where like the real listening is. It's like if you can just hang in there for that extra like 1 second of discomfort and then see what they say, like you will
Yeah,
get
yeah.
so much deeper with somebody than to just fill the void automatically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I often can tell when I'm not being attuned to when someone's like on a monologue and they're not, and like I can feel myself shifting or getting bored or like really like maybe not following them, and they're not kind of maybe pausing and checking in or asking any questions. Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How,
Yeah.
if somebody feels, I would say on the opposite direction. So we kind of talked about, okay, if I'm not attuning, I can slow down, I can pause. But for somebody who maybe has more difficulty speaking up, or is feeling being railroaded, in that sense, where the other person isn't necessarily attuning to them, what's like your coaching to a person in that situation, or a person with more of
Mm.
that, tendency, I want to say?
I mean, I think so much of this isn't. I hesitate to give blanket statements in that because I like so much of communication is context. You know, like it would be easy for me to say something like, "You should speak up and let people know."
Sure.
Just let them know that or set a boundary, or say something like, "Please ask me a question." But the truth is, conversation is such. It's an art, but it's also just a very, very delicate dance, and I'm tend to be reticent to offer advice to more marginalized or down power people, mostly because I think marginalized and down power people are often making all kinds of decisions about how they're navigating being railroaded or being dominated in that moment, including making judgments potentially about like, oh, is this the kind of person that I'm actually interested in building a relationship with if they're obviously not able to attune to me? I see this all the time, all the time. Is this, like and I guess I'll just say that a lot of my clients come to me after they've received a big call out or cancellation. And especially for men, especially for people on the autism spectrum, concrete and specific feedback delivered directly is often the most transformative intervention. I think a lot of people who others experience as dominant really would prefer that other people liked them and felt good about them and good around them. Not always. There's a lot of people who just don't care and are happy to railroad their way through every conversation, and and there's a big spectrum. But I know for myself, and I certainly for a lot of the men that I've worked with, that the most transformative moments of my life often have been the moments where someone I respected took me aside and told me their experience of me, especially if their experience of me was challenging. And it is so powerful to do that from a place of love before you've gotten to the point where you're like, fuck this guy. I don't want to have anything to do with him. It's such a gift. And it's dangerous and scary to offer feedback, and it's such an incredible offering because it requires taking risks. It's a gift that requires a risk of the giver. Real risk of getting yelled at, of triggering the other person's defensiveness, or getting, of like all of a sudden becoming a potential enemy. I want to be, yeah, this is a real thing. Okay. So people come to me all the time and say, hey, Mischa, like there's this guy in our community who's like made people uncomfortable, but I'm like, I don't really want to like raise it with him because I know he's going to like demand that like I give him specifics, and then I'm going to have to like speak for other people. But I also don't want to raise it with him because I'm worried that he will then perceive me as a threat. He might perceive me as having a bad story about him and make some kind of preemptive calculations such that like it's actually now politically advantageous to alienate me or ostracize me. So especially if it's someone in power, I'm much less likely to offer that feedback because I'm afraid of the potential consequences. Julie Diamond, this academic that I mentioned earlier, talks about this. I'm going to not do it complete service. I'm going to do a disservice, but paraphrasing, she talks about that the more power you have, the less likely anybody else is to mention it to you, which means the more likely you are to abuse it.
Yeah. You become more likely to be the emperor not wearing any clothes walking down the road.
Because the more power you have, the more likely, the less likely anybody else is to name, hey, this doesn't work for me. Right? So the way to wield power, like this, you railroaded me in that conversation, or you were really rude to me or dismissive, or I didn't like the way that you navigated consent in that experience, etc. Or I didn't like the way that you didn't attune to me. Like I was, really intimidated. You should have known better, etc. So the right way to wield that power, again, we come back to this, the right way to wield power is to recognize this about yourself, recognize this about your position, to recognize that people are less likely to say something to you. I just experienced, like, perfect small example. I just experienced this. It doesn't have to be nefarious. It doesn't have to be abuse or assault. In a roommate meeting, and I live in a communal house in the Oakland Hill. In a roommate meeting, I got really excited about our subletter who wanted to stay another month. And I was like, oh, she's so great. Isn't she great, everybody? Right? I tend to get really excited. This is like a thing for me. And I just assumed that she was getting along with everybody else because I'd never seen any evidence to the contrary, and everybody seemed to be on board, and everybody kind of like nodded their head. And we were like, yeah, totally, we're all good. And like a couple of weeks later, my roommate was like, I really don't like this subletter. I really don't feel comfortable with them, and there's all these other things. And of course, I could say, well, why didn't you raise that at the meeting? Why didn't you?
Right.
But the truth is, the reason is because she was like, well, you were so excited about it. You were so like, I would have had to like become the block of your enthusiasm train.
Right.
And what I could have done with my big voice and my presence and my personality is to be like, I'm really excited about this, but I'm really curious how everybody else is. That would have been a more elegant use of my influence and power in that meeting.
Yeah, that was going to be my question in this is, as we gain power, and I think this is one of the things that I think about often as someone who wants to make a significant impact in the world and wants to grow in my own power and wants to make sure that I do not become that narcissist and become this ignorant of all of the things that are going on around me. How do you help create that safety and that spaciousness for others to feel safe to call you out? Because as you said, like the bigger and stronger and whatever that you get, the less likely that is to happen. So you have to have those relationships and that safety created around you. Otherwise, it's very easy to go off kilter and not listen or not pay attention or not have the space for those voices to come and talk to you.
Totally. There's so many ways. All right. Number one is project out clearly that you don't exclusively rely on other people to call you out before you change. Like she didn't, even after that, she didn't point that out to me, that dynamic. She said, actually, I don't feel that excited about this subletter. And I was the one who was like, oh shit, like I see in that meeting, I could have done a lot better. She didn't call me out on that I railroaded her. I said it, right? So like I'm demonstrating in that moment, well, I didn't catch myself at the time, but at least I have a practice of noticing when I'm out of integrity proactively as much as possible. And again, there's ways to message that I don't just rely on other people to tell me off before I change. This is a whole part about like someone of integrity versus someone who's just like bull in a china shopping their way through life until they hit some sort of a roadblock or wall, right? It is a very aggressive and frankly often harmful way to go through life, is just waiting for other people to call you out. I'm going to get back to your question, but like this is actually a part of the answering your question.
Yeah, no,
right? Like it is actually saying, no, I have a standard of integrity around like how I want to show up in community. In this case, like how I want to be in conversation, how I want to manage my enthusiasm and my tendency to dominate conversations at the expense of other people's opinions. Right? So I'm going to work in our meetings, especially around issues like this and decisions, and try to do better at catching myself when I'm really enthusiastic about a thing, and use that as an opportunity to be like, "Ooh, I'm really enthusiastic, but I really want to hear from each person." Like, and I'm going to use my voice to create that space. I'm going to do it. Right? Like having a code, having a set of standards of behavior, of values that I'm loyal to, regardless of if I get feedback from others, regardless, right? I want to be a good communicator. I want people to feel comfortable around me. Like, it's important to me. It's also important to me, to cultivate, in this case, like a really, like a beautiful yes to the people that we're living with, and to bring out other people's voices who might be more marginalized. I mean, those are just values that I have. So in that moment, she wasn't mad at me about it. She was like, oh yeah, I should have spoken up, you know? And I wasn't sure I wanted to like get in the way. And now I'm like, ugh. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't some like egregious offense, but I'm taking it seriously. I'm taking it even and sometimes more seriously than she is. Like that failure for me was a bigger failure than it was an offense for her.
Right.
Right. So I'm not orienting my change based on how impactful I am on others. I'm orienting my change based on how in or out of integrity I see that I am. Which is a huge difference. Like most people I know, like only change when they're disrupting other people and when they're forced to, right?
Yeah.
You have to create the forcing functions in ourselves. Create the forcing function in yourself, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing is like as a professional, I have feedback forms. I have a feedback practice before and after my, like client engagements, my teaching engagements. I have an external ombuds person or a external supervisory structure that I proactively name before every client engagement and teaching engagement, where I say, if you have a challenge with me, I commit to receive your feedback directly if you want to offer it to me. And I commit to receiving it with openness and curiosity. Commit. And if you're not comfortable giving me feedback, I welcome it anonymously to my supervisors who have authority over me. And also, experience. And so like, if you're uncomfortable with me or you think I'm unsafe in any way, like I'm messaging that I've set up an actual structure of accountability for myself. I don't think I'm perfect, and it's important to me to, to not operate in the world in a way that assumes that I'm perfect or that assumes that if I'm doing anything bad, other people will tell me. I think that's an incredibly dangerous assumption. And we've all met those kinds of people who walk into every room being like, I can be loud, just let me know if I'm too much. Like, That's not a way of doing this. That's not a way of being in life, of just outsourcing all accountability and responsibility on others to raise their hand and get in your way.
Right.
That's a tyrannical way of navigating the world, and people will be repelled.
Yeah, turning everybody into your bumpers in the bowling alley, right?
Yeah. Inviting it if it's aligned, indicating that you're going to welcome it and not get defensive. And then, of course, you practice also, this is a whole another point, you practice non-defensiveness. Practicing non-defensive. I cannot tell you, the biggest skill that I teach is non-defensiveness. The thing that makes most people afraid to offer feedback is like thinking this person's going to get defensive. And there's so many ways to be defensive. You minimize the feedback. You flip it around and attack the other person. You, oh, that wasn't that big a deal. Oh, you're just being so sensitive. Oh, yeah, I didn't mean to, Another way of minimizing is simply saying, oh, God, I'm so sorry. Like, are we good? Right? You're not actually taking it in, taking the time to absorb it and really, well, shit, there's more for me to see here. There's really, I'm going to take the time, and to examine. So one of the best ways of indicating that you're open to feedback is demonstrating that you're the kind of person that takes even the small stuff seriously. Like, hey, there was that little moment in our conversation the other day where like I noticed that you kind of shut up or you kind of clammed up and I was kind of railroading you and I was kind of dominating. You didn't say anything, but like I wanted to at least name that I felt the disconnect. I felt myself like railroading you. And yeah, I wanted us to offer to see if there was a thing there and really welcome it if you're open to sharing with me how that impacted you, because I care and I'm interested. That indicates that I'm the kind of person that's safe to give feedback to. Right?
Yeah.
Bosses can do this. Community leaders can do this. Celebrity musicians can do this with their entourage. Right? Like husbands can do this with their spouses. Right? Like we can all do this. We can all be proactive at modeling that we are people of integrity and that we care enough about our integrity to proactively be seeking where we might have been out of it, rather than assuming that if you haven't, come to me and gotten in my face that we must be all good.
Yeah. A lot of what I hear in that is like really developing that ability to be a reflective and cleaning oven, right? That ability to identify and
Yeah.
notice what's going on with yourself and being able to be like, okay, cool, this is what's I noticed before even anybody had to do come in. My question in sort of the opposite direction of that in a sense
Sure.
is like how maybe this isn't, but like how do we keep that from being needy? And I'm thinking about even myself as somebody who's a little bit more in like the anxious attachment portion, right? Where there's it can be this desire to be like, oh, I want to make sure everything's okay, and that becomes another way of
Or
like self-validating or pushing somebody's thing away or creating a problem that wasn't even there to just get some other sort of need met because I feel insecure. Like how do you navigate that tension between those two things?
I don't really know exactly what you're asking right now.
Okay, yeah. Could you ask me a question that might help me clarify?
Like, yeah, uh, I, what would be an example of
Sure.
what you're
So,
describing?
sure. So, if I'm someone who grew up with a basically belief that I'm bad, right? Then what might happen
But didn't
is
we all?
that's, I mean, some of us did, some of us I don't know did the same way. Um,
Oh.
but believing that kind of idea and then needing to, I want to say like overly check in or like overly get from other people like this
Hmm.
this other part of myself that like needs to be really secure, and so it's constantly checking, but like even that checking in won't necessarily solve that like inner security problem, right? And there can be,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't know if this exactly answers it, but I mean, I've definitely encountered, and I think some of us are predisposed to assuming, as the Paul Simon song goes, when something goes wrong, I'm the first to admit it.
Hmm.
First to admit it, and the last one to know.
Hmm.
It's a great lyric. Um, that we're predisposed to assuming everything's our fault,
Right.
predisposed to self martyrdom, predisposed to like effusive apologies, constantly taking the blame, and I think that a there could be a point at which the the violation of integrity isn't actually in the act that we're so sorry for, but in our absence of dignity. The absence of self-love can itself be a violation of our own integrity, and
Hmm.
it can itself set other people at ease, uneasy. Um, I've met people who I find my body really reacts, um, give me warning signals about, who I can see are so full of shame and self-abnegation that I worry that they're going to flip that shame into judgment and judge me. That they're like, so I don't view it as a harmless vice to be insecure.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I really don't, and especially after 7 years full time of working with men who have done harm. Every one of us, like we're all, it's always insecurity. Everyone's insecure.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to use that insecurity as an excuse to not examine yourself, to not check in with yourself, to not um, own your own power. And I also see it when it goes too far into the kind of like that kind of um, apologetic, constantly apologizing persona.
Hmm.
I see that also as an abdication of responsibility because there's no backbone there. There's nothing I can rely on.
Hmm.
If someone who's constantly apologizing for everything commits to change, I don't really trust them because they're just a collapsible uh, noodle.
Yeah.
Uh, that's not someone who I believe can keep a promise. Um, Martyrdom isn't right in that kind of like
Yeah.
effusive way isn't trustworthy.
Right.
Like I'd rather be with someone who always maintains their center and their dignity, and so I think, ironically, there's a work to be done often for for people to develop that part of their own standards. You're like, where do I erase myself and collapse myself? And yes, sometimes God knows it's a safety mechanism. Sometimes it's a survival mechanism. So deep compassion as like two white dudes talking about this shit, but like,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know, like the dignity and self-empowerment piece is itself a form of staying in integrity with yourself. This is not, yeah. I think I'm going to leave it there. I guess you named at the beginning of this conversation that like you didn't want to get too abstract or vague, and I'm noticing that we're getting a little abstract and vague. Like this isn't actually about either of our lives or experiences, and it's cool, but let's get out of the psychobabble.
Sure, sure. I'm happy to. I want to, but I also don't want to. Well, hey, let me think of a question that
Totally. Oh, that's so great. It's just we just demonstrated the same dynamics that we.
Yeah, like because I think like I hear what you're saying, and like I think the psychobabble. I think there's importance in the psychobabble because I think that it's how we unwind things, and I think you do a beautiful job of explaining them.
No,
It's
thanks.
very clear. I think where I'd want to go with it, and because I'm noticing the word that you've mentioned a lot. Initially, it was attunement. We were mentioning attunement a lot, and the word that's coming up a lot right now has been integrity.
Ah,
And maybe the way that I can ask this is, I can ask you what is integrity,
sure.
which we can go there. But I'd also love to know maybe your own journey that has helped you discover what your own integrity is.
Well, I think of integrity like integrity is very literally wholeness. Integrity is the state of being our full and most authentically self-expressed self. That was a tautology. Our most authentically expressed. Um, and and so more concretely, I don't say what is my integrity. I say what does it look like for me to be in integrity. And what that means is for my actions to match my words, for what I do every day to match who I say I am to others, but also to myself, right? If it's important for me to be spiritually developing and I'm not praying or going to my temple or cultivating my relationship to God at all, I might not be hurting anybody actively, but I am out of integrity, right? If it's really important to me to be present in my life, and even more than that, if it's really important to me to be constantly growing and sucking the marrow out of the bones of existence, and I haven't traveled or adventured or lived, and I'm constantly numbing myself with drugs or alcohol or TV or pornography, I might not be hurting anybody. But I am out of my integrity. My actions are not matching my words. My lived reality, my daily experience, right? If you were to follow me around with a video camera all day, wouldn't match who I say I am to myself, wouldn't match who I know my best self to be, wouldn't maybe match who I project myself out to others, God knows, on Instagram or whatever. Like, what is the, and so we're out of integrity when, we reject an Instagram life that's like radically different from our reality. Yeah, I think that's, well, listen, I'm not going to die on that hill, but like I do think that there's something like that where social media is training us to be constantly out of integrity, constantly projecting a life that actually doesn't match our reality. And the only alternative to do that is to use social media to like share all of your inner details to like get around that or to get away from that and actually say, this is my like messy, complicated, multifaceted reality, but that means that you have to share all of your reality with the world. And so those are kind of your options.
Yeah.
Hot take. Some of the many influences that influence this were, I mean, the mythopoetic men's movement, Mankind Project in particular, really not introduced, but was one of the pillars of the imperative to be in integrity. And one of the biggest ways to do that is to honor your word. Honor your word. I mean, a lot of being in integrity just comes down to like, are you someone who keeps their promises? Are you someone who like does what they say they're going to do? There's also a deep practice that I learned from my background as a life coach and my coach training with the Academy for Coaching Excellence. This woman, Maria Nemeth, who was the founder of that school, who came up with the idea of defining your own standards of integrity, like not leaving it up to society or to your partner right now to tell you what's right or wrong. But really finding for yourself, like, what are my actual values? Like, taking that leap and saying, what do I actually intrinsically believe is important, you know? And it can be incredibly confronting. Like, there's times, and I've worked with clients where, like, you know what, it's really just not that important to me to prioritize safety when I'm running workshops, or it's really just not that important to me to avoid harm as a stand-up comedian. Like, I don't mind insulting other, you know what I mean? Like, but this at least gives us the clarity to see, oh, wow, okay, that's a value that you don't really have, that everybody thinks that you should have, that everybody gets offended that you don't have, but you don't really have, right? But inevitably, we're incredibly complex creatures. So staying in integrity for that comedian is a great example. It's important to me to be subversive as a comedian, say. It's important to me to push buttons and push boundaries. That's where I know I'm in my zone of genius. It's where I know I'm making the contribution that I'm here to make in the world. And if some people get hurt along the way, some people, you know, some feelings get hurt, I'm okay with that. Very good, very clear. What are the other values that you have in your world? How important is not doing harm? Well, you're okay with offending some people, but maybe not stabbing people? Okay, so there's somewhere in there is a real value that you hold around not harming.
Right.
Can you reconcile and be in that project? Be in the project of reconciling your values when they're not obviously synced, when they're in conflict, right? I have a value of being explorative, but I also have a value of building community. Tension. I have a value of, like, being fully expressed in my sexuality, but my partner really, really doesn't want to play in the same way. Or I have a, you know, like, our values also like often conflict. And to be a person of integrity is to be in that constant awareness and that dance of, like, okay, like, where am I radically out of integrity? Where am I, like, can I, what does that balance look like in this particular context, in this particular situation? What is the hill that I'm willing to die on? What is the hill that I'm not? I think we all must have a code of behavior. And I think, I mean, not to be too gender essentialist here, but I think part of, oh God, am I going to really? Okay, fine. Part of being a man is to have a code, being a person, frankly, of honor. It's really not about men, but being a person of honor is to have a code of behavior, an ethics of behavior that you can actually talk about and cite and that guide your actions. And too often, especially in our society, I see people just acting. I don't break the law much. I don't do harm. Mostly, I guess. Well, at least, you know. And otherwise, I just do my thing. But that's not really acting in a code, right?
Yeah.
It's much less trustworthy to me. You know. So when I respond to people who are like, you know what, it's really, who, like, come to me and say, hey man, like, I really wanted to come to that event and, like, be supportive to you, and, you know, my wife just had a baby, and it's like, I know I committed to it, but I really can't, you know. And for me to feel that it bothers them, and also for me to feel their dignity and, like, honor, like, you know what, they're prioritizing their wife, like, very good, sounds good, you know, and their baby, like, okay, like, I just had this happen this week, you know, and I could feel this brother of mine, this friend who, like, you know, he just had a baby, and of course he wanted to show up for this event that I asked him to help me facilitate this weekend. Yeah. And he just sensed into his own capacity, and he called me up ahead of time, and I could feel that it weighed on him. I could feel that he, like, weighed his conflicting responsibilities to keep his word or to honor his family, and that to me landed really trustworthy.
Yeah, beautiful. To go back to your earlier question about making it the more personal journey component, I think that what I would love to know is, how did you get started in this work initially, and what brought you to it? Was there a moment where you felt out of integrity? Did somebody just invite you to Mankind Project? Like, how did you actually get started in this, and, like, how did that begin for you?
Oh, it's such an expansive question. I've always been a really really oriented towards service. I grew up with a lot of privilege and capacity, and yet, so I've always been in the nonprofit world or like being in public service, but I wasn't. I was also really, I was really bad at it. I kept on getting fired. I was difficult to manage. I was stubborn and obstinate and really opinionated and not, frankly, particularly aware of my privilege and resistant to narratives of privilege. And yeah, I was raised really liberal, and so I had this kind of colorblind dynamic about race. I was really transactional and extractive in a lot of my sexual relationships. I didn't have a lot of self-awareness, and I had a series of moments in my life, but one that I'll really highlight was when I was 25. I was in a relationship with a much older woman, and it ended really badly, and there was violence in the breakup between both of us. But I was violent, and I had never been violent, and no one had ever been violent to me. But the context around that dynamic was me being out of integrity in a lot of ways. I had let myself go. I'd let my body go. It was radically out of integrity for me to be with this person, to be living with her. Like I was not in that relationship for reasons that were in line with my values. It was much more about like having an experience or an adventure than it was about like cultivating love. We were radically like on different pages. It was a fundamentally transactional and extractive way of being in relationship, and I was in the wrong career, in the wrong path. I was drinking. I was drunk at that time. Like, I was really out of integrity in a lot of facets of my life. And in all the therapy and counseling that I did to try to make sense of that experience, what emerged, like, I didn't have some like big trauma in my childhood that I could point to.
Sure.
It wasn't like, I was abused, now I've abused.
Right.
Right? Which is a truism or a saying in the restorative justice community, right? Like the first act of violence that we commit is never one that we are inflicting. In my case, it was. Like, I did not receive violence, You could make an argument that being raised white, privileged, and is itself a form of like alienation. I mean, fine, okay, but like, no, like
Yeah.
But what I was someone who was really not connected to his values in that moment. What I was someone who had like not grounded at all in a sense of like examining my own life and being like, whoa, I need to proactively make changes. I was riding life and like letting things kind of happen and getting drunk and getting high often to avoid even the discomfort of examining my own life. And that was really, really informative. It helped show me what it looked like to really fuck up and cause harm. It taught me that even the most well-intentioned, privileged, loving, liberal people, I've always gotten the feedback from everybody in my life of how loving and sweet and wonderful a man I am. Even someone as wonderful as me can really cause harm. And that helped set me on a path of self-examination. And then 10 years later, I'd failed at my most recent nonprofit job, and Trump had just gotten elected, and I just gotten fired, and I was like, I need to really change. I was back out of shape and like out of relationship with my body. I still hadn't gotten into like any kind of like dynamic of respect and love with my body. So I went on a self-improvement journey, finally took the time to like at 35 at this point to get in touch with my body, do a bunch of self-work, and I found coaching. I found that coaching path. I found an incredibly influential anti-racism mentor, who taught me what it looked like, not just to be in integrity, but to restore integrity when I'm out of integrity. What it looks like to consciously get back into integrity, and sometimes to use other people as witnesses or to ask other people to be witnesses. Sometimes this extends into an apology, right? Or to repair or restoration. But the fundamental orientation is not, oh, I've fucked up or made a mistake, let me apologize. The orientation is, I'm a person of integrity.
Yeah.
And when I'm out of integrity, I restore it. My commitment is not to never, ever make a mistake. My commitment is to proactively minimize my mistakes. And when I do make a mistake, catch it early. And if I can't catch it, welcome it when it's pointed out to me, and then repair.
Right.
That's the commitment.
It makes me think a lot about with meditation, right? Like that same practice of bringing your attention back to your breath, and like that is what you're doing in meditation is focusing on your breath. But there are large periods of that time often where your attention is off of your breath and is simply noticing and coming back and kind of restoring that. And it sounds like a similar practice for integrity, where it's like the goal of, if you want to call it like a game, is to be integrous 100% of the time, but knowing that you won't be, and like bringing yourself back in alignment with that. You mentioned that your mentor, and it also seems like, I think something I'm noticing about a lot of your mentors have been women, which I think is really interesting. For a lot of your men's work stuff.
Yeah, it's weird. I have some beautiful men's work mentors, and even though I'm a men's, and I'm affiliated with the Sacred Sons organization. Like, I've been initiated by Mankind Project. I'm friendly with a lot of other men's work group leaders, but it's definitely true that the most influential teachers in my life have been women or non-binary people, and that often, frankly, the most influential authors and academics and philosophers have been women. I mean, I'm a massive devotee of bell hooks, and I mean, like the people, the writers and authors who have influenced me are Naomi Klein and Amy Goodman. There's Danielle Surratt, who runs Common Justice in New York, a restorative justice organization. Amir Srinivasan, who is a Oxford philosophy professor. I mean, the best minds in writing about the work of repair and restoration, in my experience, I could be wrong, but in my experience, have been women.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, I could offer you a pat answer. I could offer you some simplistic answer about proximity to marginalization and like a relationship with harm. And there is likely some truth there. I don't know if I want to make a gender essentialist argument about that or investigate that in particular, although there's a hazy vision that I think that all the influential people who have like influenced my life and my work, the very hazy, vague dream value that I could posit that they all share, which is interconnectedness. That there's intrinsic worth and value in uncovering ways for us to be interconnected and interpersonal, and that there's deep truth in the hard work, the less glamorous work of relating, like feedback conversations and overcoming defensiveness and really thorough repair and the naming of harm. All the stuff about relationships that most of us would rather not pay money to take classes on, would rather not focus on for our academic studies, would rather not spend $10,000 to $20,000 on a coach to support you after you fucked up. Like, most of us don't, rather just do the fun shit.
How do I make more money? How do I get more sex? How do I get more
Exactly. Oh, God, the world of men's coaching is that. Is that. the world. I mean, I come from a world of men's coaching, like where like the vast majority of coaches are just helping make more money, get more women. Right? That's what it is. Right? Executive coaches on the make more money side, pickup artist coaches on the get more women side. It's like, really, this is the right. And yeah, of course, that's the reaction to the way our society functions. And yeah, here's a critique of my practice and my work and my, like, I have not yet figured out a way to make this a sustainable work for myself and achieve the goals that I'm here to make, and also make it even remotely accessible. Like I've created a practice like many executive coaches, or that functions based on rich men paying for it.
Yeah.
Right? Like I have aspirations to offer these messages more broadly, but right now my business model is really oriented towards men who can pay a lot of money, and that's a problem, and it's a problem both for like my overall mission in the world. It's also a problem for my values. Like it's really like a tension, frankly, that I hold, and often and at times it like really emerges as like a tension that's even, am I really out of integrity in pursuing this business model right now? I'm actually in a process of challenging the business model and seeing how I can shift it, because I'm noticing that like there's a part of me that really doesn't feel right or whole. And this is the other piece about being in integrity. Can I keep going?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Is this juicy? Right.
Yeah.
It's tuning into that little voice. It's like something's off. Something's off here in your lived reality, Mischa. Like, my suspicion, I don't know if we all phrase it this way, but my suspicion is that we all have a little voice, that little voice that tells us like what right relationship is. My coaching school called it the voice of wisdom. I mean, listen to the voice of wisdom. It's not always obvious. It's not always clear, but a lot of us do. If we could, like a lot of, like my theory is that we all have the ability to hone our listening, hone our ability to listen to the voice inside us and take action. And that, frankly, for a lot of us, the best way to do this is with support. You can't afford an executive coach. A lot of we can, for instance, declare our intention to stop drinking to our 3 closest friends, right? Like, I mean, that's a support mechanism. That's a perfect example of, you know what? This is, and I would frame that as like a step of restoring integrity. It's out of my integrity to be drinking in the way that I'm drinking, and I'm going to take this step to do my best to restore integrity. And part of the support that I'm going to seek is, in this case, the social accountability of telling my best friends and therefore making me a liar if I break it to them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Makes me think a lot about like I know one of the important things for me over the last couple of years is my friends started like a men's group, right? And just having that space to talk with each other and share and get feedback and be in that space with, I would say, other men where maybe it's easier to call each other out in that kind of space and help each other grow and support each other and also be listened to in that space. Or even say, hey, I'm not open for feedback right now. I just need to dump stuff, right? And
Totally.
just having that space where you can have that support.
Oh, I just had a really potent meeting with my men's group last night in which, I mean, I had been dancing around my addiction to Netflix and social media and just like constantly watching screens, and no one forced me to, no one even brought this up, but I brought it to the group because I was like, you know what? I don't want to bring this to the group. I am resistant to this, but I need to make a commitment, guys, like don't let me leave this meeting without making a commitment about stopping. And right in front of my men's group, I deleted all my social media accounts. A couple other guys got inspired and like agreed to like do it with me as solidarity. And we're screen cleansing for a week as a reset together. Very, very beautiful energy of just, yep, the opportunity is there. Like this is, and that's, such a beautiful reminder of like the best way to use men's groups. It's really easy to use men's groups as just like, okay, it's just a kvetching session. We just like talk about our feelings. This is what's going on. Okay, good night. See you guys next week. But men's groups can really be a platform to like propel yourself and propel each other to your higher selves, right? But you have to choose to use them that way. Otherwise, they can just be and even worse, they can be a place of reinforcing your toxicity. They can, all of our toxicity, they can be a place of reinforcing our worst habits.
Yeah.
You know, the classic example being, you know, a guy goes to a men's group, you know, I hit my wife again. Oh, bro, that must be really hard for you. Right? And that's not the purpose either. Like, it's important to have a space to be emotional, you know, to talk about like your feelings of guilt and shame. And it's really easy for that to like manifest in someone continuing to be radically out of integrity in their life and also be in a men's group, and no one ever says anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like it's very easy. You know, one of the guys in my men's group is, I love him because he always thinks differently and he'll ask questions that are different. And one of the things he has said that I think is like a fair critique is like, you know, the one challenge about being in a men's group is that you're surrounded by other men who want to be in a men's group. So there's still a sense of like you are somewhat in your own bubble, and there is, you know, that's just kind of a reality I think that we all exist with. We can do things to challenge our bubble and grow outside of that, but there's also like even when I'm trying to escape my bubble, there's a sense of like I'm choosing things that are within my purview of my bubble, which to escape it with, right? So I'm jumping out of there into something different. Yeah, that is within my awareness, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we're all in our little bubble.
Well, Mischa, this has been a really lovely conversation.
Oh, are we going to end it on the bubble?
No,
Is that it?
We don't have to end it on the bubble. I really wanted to kind of pivot a little bit more into what you do and how you got into the work that you do, because I do think it's just really important.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So I became a coach, as so many people who are trying to find themselves do, right around 2017. You know, when I got fired and I went into this self-discovery journey, and I started wanting to be a coach, and I didn't know what kind of coach I wanted to be. But Me Too hit at the same time, and that was really impactful on me. That was the other kind of moment that I was alluding to earlier. I mean, it wasn't because there was some like massive recognition or realization that I experienced of like, oh, I've assaulted people in the past, or oh, I've got a call out that I'm escaping. There really wasn't that. I mean, but there was a lot of people in my communities who were coming forward with stories about other people in my communities. And it was an opportunity, a moment to thoroughly examine the life that I'd led up to then, in particular around sex and power. I mean, Me Too, if nothing else, was a call to all men to examine their relationship to sex and power. You know? Very easy to dismiss Me Too as a thing about Hollywood and super, super powerful men, which is really missing the point. Really missing the point. If you haven't done your inventory, Me Too was the call, and there will be more. Anyway, so I started hosting these workshops in my apartment called Men Confronting the Patriarchy. And it was just completely like volunteer. It was totally free. It was just mostly people in my communities. And people kept on coming. I'd make a big bowl of chili. I used a curriculum adapted from something from the Standing Up for Racial Justice that I'd received, this group that... Anyway, it was potent. Every conversation was potent. We went over vocabulary words. We talked about our past. We did exercises in which we like owned parts of our pasts that were coming up, and that, you know, and harm, frankly, that we'd done. And I saw the potency for transformation and of men getting real about their relationship to power and sex and harm. And that realization has driven me ever since. It's third rail of our sexually liberated or sexual revolution world. It's certainly the third rail of what it means to be sex positive. It's this flip side of the coin of freedom, harm. Harm. And the consent edifice is not preventing harm. It's not getting us there at all. And it is still beautiful to see how consent culture has grown, but it's still not enough. But beyond even that critique, which I could get into, like, I just started seeing how healing it could be for men to talk about their harm openly and then be faced with the choice, now that they've named it, to act differently in the world. And that this was something that nobody wanted to talk about, that women often never brought up to men. I'm sorry to be so gender essentialist, but that men never talked about with each other. So why would everybody ever mention it, right? Like, we're hidden as men. We're hidden from the consequences of our actions. Like, there's so many incidents and experiences we've had where I'm sure that we've like really, really done harm, but nobody's ever told us, right?
Right.
And so we don't know, and no one tells us, and we don't talk about it with each other because it's really uncomfortable, and none of us know how to talk about it well. So shit. So I said, this is the place that I want to make my impact. This is the place that I want to really dive into. And no one, like, not no one, but very, very few other people were doing it. I mean, I'm still seeking out peers, and I have over the last 7 years honed my practice to be somewhere between coaching and mentoring and restorative justice. Some, there's and so when I'm hired, I'm usually hired by someone who's wanting to do better in their life and realizing that they may have stepped out of integrity. And sometimes it's like a called out or canceled celebrity who wants like image rehabilitation. And I'm not a PR flack. I don't do that. Although God knows that's where the money is. Jesus. Not interested. I'm interested in actually affecting transformation and having my clients develop a relationship with their integrity and accountability. The other place where the money is just offering really expensive certifications as good men to men who will pay for them. That's what the market incentives are telling me to do. Right. I also don't do that. I never endorse my clients. I never, shout from the rooftops, this guy is safe now. No. Yeah. That's what everybody wants. Won't do it. But what I do is I stand alongside my clients as they stand in the fire of their own actions, the consequences, as we laboriously unearth what the harm was, what were the breaches of integrity, like all the different places that I have, and maybe even still am acting out of integrity, in particular around sex and power. And in ways that cause harm. But in general, in all of my life, where am I out of integrity around work or family or spirituality, But my focus is on this intersection of sex, power, and harm because it's such a third rail in our society, because we still don't have good or nuanced ways to talk about it, because we still radically villainize anybody who has done any harm. We create no space for people to have done harm and also be in society, to be multifaceted beings. We don't honor survivors in a right way. Our justice system doesn't come close to honoring survivors. We don't even have a language for talking about sexual harm that is anything but legalese, which is the consent framework. It's just about whether or not something was a crime. Like, we really, really are babies as a society in this area. And so I find it endlessly compelling as an area, and certainly impactful. God knows, like, it's my clients kind of graduate from working with me with not just having like cleaned up their reputations, which is sometimes a decades-long project, but with a shifted relationship to integrity and attunement and accountability, a shifted value set often around these topics. And a radically enhanced skill set for understanding their own actions in the context of how they might have impacted others, for being empathic and like kind of sleuthing where they might have impacted others, exercising what I call speculative empathy, when in the absence of someone telling you exactly the feedback, right? Not relying on someone to tell you exactly how they feel, but welcoming it if they do. But if they don't or aren't willing, exercising detective work and thinking, how could this might have impacted them based on everything I know about my own actions, based on from the past, based on everything I know about how the similar actions have impacted others, conversations with friends, what I know about this person, what I've read. I could do, like teaching my clients to do emotional labor proactively. It's like an incredible intervention. And developing much healthier relationships with power. I mean, some of my clients are very powerful, traditionally powerful men, CEOs or celebrities, and I support them to shift their relationship to power. And oftentimes, their relationship to power is one of abdication, one of like, well, I don't think I'm that powerful. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm not that influential. I wouldn't want that. I really, and really teaching them to own their power. You know. So weird. Like I'm an empowerment voice for white men. It's true. But what it looks like is not like you deserve to tell everybody whatever you want and do anything you want. What it looks like is be in right relationship with that power. Welcome to the world of responsibility and the imperative to attune and to exercise self-care and to overcome your narratives of inadequacy and insufficiency and scarcity and insecurity. That's my mission, and that's what I'm here to do.
Beautiful. One of the things that I've heard you mention as it relates to this with this topic, and it's been a phrase that has really resonated with me a lot, is this idea of you can have consent and still cause harm.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could unpack that a little bit more for me.
Sure. So think of a Venn diagram and 3 circles. The first is acts that are consensual. The second is acts that are pleasurable. And the third is acts that are harmful. Okay? So where pleasure and consent overlap and harm doesn't overlap, that's what we're all told to go for, right? Should be pleasurable and should be consensual. But there's plenty of sex that's not pleasurable, right? Like the meh sex that so much of society talks about, right? That's consensual and neither harmful nor pleasurable. Meh, right? But where it gets complicated is that there can be consent and there can also be harm. There might even also be pleasure. Some examples. I consented to sex with this man and it was amazing, and he completely, he gave me 15 orgasms, and it was only later that I discovered that he was married, and he never spoke to me again, and he, made me, Now, of course, consent theorists will immediately argue, oh, that wasn't technically consensual. Okay, fine, right, by that legal definition, but, in the moment, was I, yes, did I consent in every possible, concept of the word? Yes. Was it informed? No. Okay. What about consent that sex that I absolutely had that was amazing and juicy and yummy, and then all of a sudden I could feel him disconnecting. It was really loving and slow, and in that moment I was really into it. And then it started pounding and getting super hard and fast and intense, and he put his hands around my throat, and I was kind of curious in that moment. I wasn't sure whether or not I consented or not. I mean, I was into it a little, I was like, ooh, this is exciting and different, but I definitely was okay with it at the time, and now I just feel violated. I don't care if it's fair or not. I don't trust him anymore. Yes, it was not it was consensual, but he completely took advantage of me. He didn't attune to me. He didn't he became almost like a different person. I allowed it to happen, but I am really closed to him now. I'm really skeptical of him now. I don't trust him. I consented to, I definitely said yes to him putting his hands around my throat because I was curious about it, but the act wasn't the problem. It was the way he did it. There was something that came over him in his eyes that like just freaked me out. And it was like he got all murderous all of a sudden. Like, yeah, I consented. But now there's such disconnection. Like I don't trust him to be attuned to me. I don't trust him to be aligned with me. I mean, this is the world that we're all walking around in when it comes to sex. And a lack of attunement can be harmful. Not just, oh gosh, I really wish you'd be more present. Like really harmful. The emergence of energies that like are not welcome in the space of violence or of, you know, like of triggering actions or words can be really harmful and disruptive. And we ought, like, or even like, I totally consented to sex with that facilitator, you know, at that workshop. I mean, yeah, I know that like he's not supposed to like sleep with his students, but like I was really into it. He was really like sexy, and he was like taught us so much, and like the sex was really good. But now like everybody else in the workshop is like really like suspicious of me and tense with me, and like also he's just like ignoring me completely, and he's not like honoring the connection that we had. He told me that he was like really excited about me, and I thought that we were like, I thought he loved me. I consented. Real harmful. Dishonesty, betrayal causes harm. Consent doesn't speak to those things, and it's not frankly meant to. Consent is frankly like mostly a legal structure, and what a lot of consent theorists have done is try to make consent mean everything. Make consent the umbrella in which we put, oh, like it wasn't consensual if it wasn't attuned. It wasn't consensual if it wasn't completely informed. It wasn't consensual if he didn't like specify that he wasn't going to be emotionally available. Like, not, I mean, you could parse this all, you know, try to make consent mean everything. But no, like consent is actually pretty clear. What's not clear is that consent is the only barometer of harm. Power, like the barometers of harm for sex, if you had to like really like put them into some sort of framework, consent's really only a quarter of it. If you really want to avoid harm during sex, power awareness, trauma informedness, attunement, and consent.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And that's if you want to avoid harm. If you want to avoid crimes, then just, you know, make sure you get consent. It's just so gross. Even like it feels gross in my body to just say get consent. Like just make sure you get consent before you do anything. Ugh. That's not how humans are meant to interact. We're not permission issuing machines. You know? Like we need to be attuned to each other, especially in sex. Oh, yeah. You know, you know. There's this great quote from Maya Dusenberry, who used to be the editor at Feministing, who said, like, God help us if the best thing that we can say about our sex is that it was consensual.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, that's what I honestly, I was thinking about that as you were talking about that. Even, I'm curious about even the angle of like, okay, these are the things that are required to avoid harm, which might be like a baseline for like how to, like the beginning of like having great sex, but that's also not having great sex, right? It's
well, here's the thing. Okay, great.
harm.
You will find tens of thousands of brilliant people to be on your podcast who can teach you how to have great sex. You know, my focus is on having sex responsibly and avoiding harm. That's like that, right? Like I'm not going to be the expert on having great sex, although you know everybody wants me to be. But it's really right. Like, ironically, however, what I will say is that being power informed, like truly like orienting yourself to like where is the power in this sexual dynamic happening right now, especially if we're doing kinky or power play. But like, where is the power in this dynamic? Where's house are we at? How well does she know me? How well does she trust me? How much do I understand about her trauma history, right? Am I trauma informed? How much do I understand about my trauma responses and her trauma responses or his? How much do I know about how I act in trauma? How well am I handling my traumas? To what degree am I using sex as validation, as status seeking? And to what degree am I willing to erase my agency? You know, how much of my own work have I done? How safe a partner am I, even as a sub or bottom? Attuned Am I attuned to myself? Can I recognize what's happening in my own body? You know, have I just numbed myself with drugs and alcohol and, you know, these days GHB and ketamine, to the point of like I can't even sense myself in my own body, and like I'm using these drugs to like get me into a space where I can quote consent, where all of a sudden I'm open and wet or hard. To what degree am I sensing into this person? Like, are they inebriated? Is this even beyond like their capacity to consent? Is this right relationship for us? Is this just, you know, is this me taking advantage of the fact that they just got dumped and are kind of vulnerable and wanting reassurance? Like, is this totally consensual in this moment and they wanting some sort of sexual reassurance and validation, but they're probably going to like lose a lot of trust, and this is going to be detrimental to our dynamic in the long run? Is this sex aligned? Truly aligned? And especially for the tops or penetrative partners or the initiators in the dynamic, what responsibility, and frankly, I believe that the tops in any kind of dynamic have more responsibility to stop an interaction or slow it down. Am I conscious of, right? Am I power aware in that way? Am I wielding that power well of being the initiator and the top?
Yeah.
Not to mention all the societal imperatives to like go along with whatever the top does, and the physical safety imperatives. I mean, there's a lot there. And then finally, is it consensual? I guess the point that I was going to say is, if we do all that, in my very, very, very detailed professional experience, the sex will be better. It really will. It does, like, right? Like, all those people who are like, the consent edifice just makes me like have to like ask at every stage.
Yeah.
Right? And it makes things less sexy. Power awareness, trauma informedness, and attunement, like all that will lead to like really juicy, good communication and attunement. And you might find yourself selecting totally different partners than you would if you were just orienting around like, can I do this? Is it okay if I touch you there? Is it okay if I do this? Yes, yes, yes. Like, oh, God. What a pushy, aggressive, intense, also somehow needy way of being.
Yeah. Yeah.
Clementine Morgan, who does the Fucking Cancelled podcast. You know her?
Yeah. I follow her. Yeah.
Oh. Edgy, challenging, controversial, but brilliant. She came up with this model called the attunement model of consent, right? Which she contrasts with the contractual model, right? People in the play party communities here in the Bay Area talk about nonverbal consent, right? Just ways of thinking about like the imperative of being with rather than getting consent. If your orientation, right? You also talked about this is a game, right? Consent lends itself to a finite game. Did I get consent so I could get what I wanted? It's a very finite game, right? What I just offered is a way of accessing infinite game.
Yeah.
There's no goal of getting anywhere, right?
Yeah.
The idea is attunement.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what really started unlocking this for me with what you're talking about was I was at Lightning in a Bottle, and I was at a music festival in California, and there was like this I don't know, some sort of experience where we were doing like a shared I think touching thing, or some sort of like contact yoga, I think is what it was. And the leader of the session, she said to find somebody, make sure you get consent. And she was like, consent can be as simple as like eye contact and a smile, that person is like moving towards you, and like trusting that. And like there's something in that, to your point, for me around like the nonverbal consent, about the attunement part of it, that I'm like, that is what my soul had been missing so much in the conversation around it, where it's like, oh, this is actually what I'm really looking for, and it's what I feel when I was acting. It's what I was feeling when I was dancing with somebody. It's what I'm feeling when I'm having great sex or connecting with somebody. Or like, it's so easy to get into all the abstractions and the rules and the books and the things, but then like when you're actually with people, when you're finding that attunement, right, and that ability to tap into how others are, how you're feeling. And this is honestly even one of the things that inspired me. You and I were talking about prior, that I went to all these shows and these festivals, and it's been such a big learning of my own journey, because I was around people, especially after being in COVID and lockdown for such a long time, right, where it was like, oh, here's this opportunity to actually like practice all the stuff that I've learned from personal growth work or whatever it might be. It's like if we're not actually like interacting with people, if we're not practicing the attunement in reality and amongst others, then we're kind of just sitting in a cave and, you know, mentally masturbating in one way or another.
Indeed. Oh, oh, indeed. And yeah, and the arenas in which we could practice the skills of relating and attuning and just being human with each other um, are so wonderfully varied. And I, I think festivals can be really brilliant. I know a number of people who are um, festivals are really not great spaces
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
people who are heavily on the spectrum who benefit from in-depth conversations with who are like trying to attune to lots of different groups who are also on drugs like all at once is actually like not just not healthy but can lead to like radical disintegrity
Hmm.
moments that can set someone back a lot.
Hmm.
um, Play parties is another example that can be I mean they're incredibly heightened spaces in terms of danger,
Hmm.
right? We are especially any kind of sex positive space, we're taking huge risks with our bodies, with our identities,
Yeah.
as even just our identities as like safe or good people. I know a lot of canceled men who are like, wow, I didn't realize the degree of risk I was taking by just entering into a space where I wasn't exquisitely perfect at the skills of attunement,
Hmm.
you know? Where like now I'm like ostracized and like have like this really terrible reputation because I was like really unattuned and like let my desire become agenda and like
Yeah.
like violated some people's consent or even in like very subtle ways, but enough to make people be like, nope, like, banned. Right? I know people from this in the kink community, in the festivals communities, in Burning Man, in
Hmm.
in a lot of the alternative world, and yeah, I just want to. I've just felt like especially because you're familiar with the festival world, like the need to name just how dangerous these spaces are. Dangerous. Oh, I feel so like Nancy Reagan here. Like I equate like I equate sex positive spaces with like Formula One cars, and we're all babies getting into Formula One cars.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
really, truly, like going to a play party, like carrying with us like the incredible amount of racism and internalized sexism and internalized misogyny and internalized self-hatred. If you haven't done your work, like going into like a super liberated space can be like an incredibly bad idea.
Hmm.
Just like an incredibly risky thing to you, to your reputation, to your body, to your sense of safety.
Hmm.
You know, like anyway. I don't know. You didn't ask me about this particularly, but like I needed to name that yeah, we have a tendency to jump in headfirst and experience, but boy, we carry all of our traumas in with us, and we can often do harm.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But oh, I do this sometimes. I get heavy.
You're good. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but still.
Well, I mean, it is a heavy subject, like what you do, so it's
It
reasonable.
is. I know. I know. I try
And
to stay light.
no, I think it's valid. I think like the thing that came up for me with it is really just like, and it's something you've spoken to, but like when somebody does cause harm, because I think something that is challenging with all this stuff is it's like, okay, somebody creates harm,
Yeah.
then what? Then what do I do? Right?
Ah,
How do I do that? Like, how do you walk somebody through those steps of
how much
repair?
time you got?
I mean, I've got time, so it just depends on really how much time you've got, because we're already, past the time you've committed to me, so I don't want to keep you longer than you have to, but I'm always open.
I don't want to give a pat answer because it's really the crux of the work that I do.
Hmm.
And if there's the best thing that I can tell all of anybody who's listening about what to do when you cause harm is to is to be someone who can handle having caused harm. Can you reconcile the reality that you're someone who could cause harm and also still think of yourself as a good person? Or would the attempt to reconcile those things be so inimical to your sense of self that you will collapse or fight to avoid being faced with the reality that you did in fact cause harm? So ironically enough, all that personal work, going to therapy, doing coaching, like taking growth classes, like working on your ability to just own harm is the best thing that you can do, because really, really 99 times out of 100, and you can ask any restorative justice practitioner or about this, it's not often the thing that the person did. It's not often the instigating or original harm. Sometimes it really is. It's often the way that they reacted to it. It's how they handled it when they were called out or when they were told that they caused harm. Denial, deflection, minimization, defensiveness. I call them the 4 horsemen, right? Like this is truly the stuff to avoid. So before we even get into repair or how to handle harm or how to name harm, just being able to consciously cultivate in yourself the ability to say, I did harm and I'm still a good person. I did harm and there might be something for me to see there, might be something for me to repair and own, and I have the ability to own it, right? And the best way to do that is to be really, really, really good, thorough about owning even the small stuff, the dishes in the fucking sink, you know, the leaving the car on and draining the battery, the leaving the window open when you said that you wouldn't. Owning, recognizing, being thorough in these tiny things so that you're used to like the practice of, yep, okay, I did it. Oh, that's uncomfortable. Ooh, yeah. Oh, shit. Right. My first instinct is to minimize. My first instinct is to be like, oh, God, stop being so fucking sensitive. Oh, God, this is such annoying. Oh, you know, right? And being able to transcend all that. So you can sit. And again, what Danielle Sered calls the fire. Right? And not try to escape. You can build up your tolerance and your resistance to that. And I really can't think of a more helpful or important skill to be a human, especially if, like me, you're the kind of human that fucks up a lot. You know, maybe a little too much for people, maybe, you know, awkward or whatever. Like, yeah.
Beautiful. What's one question that you'd have for the audience to help shift their perspective or give them something different to think about in a different way?
Where in your life are you falling short of your own values? Not society's expectations, not what other people, your parents or whatever told you to do, but or to be, but of your own values. And if you can't answer that, maybe see if you could define your own values. Like, what do it even look like to define your own values? What is it? How is it important for you to be in the world? Yeah, we'll go with that.
Great. Well, I think it's a great place to wrap up, Mischa. This is a beautiful, lovely conversation.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, me too. If people want to find you, follow you, reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Despite my current hiatus from social media, God, it's just so addictive. Really challenging with that. Find me at Mischa Byruck on Instagram. That's MISCHA BYRUCK, Mischa Byruck. Or just go to evolve.men.
Beautiful. Mischa, thank you so much for your time. I'll look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thanks so much.